Hello and welcome back to the Alnwick Castle podcast. I'm Deborah Beecroft.
And I'm Daniel Watkins.
And today's episode takes us back to the 19th century and the theme of the castle's Great Kitchen, newly open to visitors in 2025.
Attached to the Great Kitchen in the Victorian period was a suite of larder rooms. The fourth of these was the Game Larder, which would have contained various kinds of meat prepared and ready to be used in cooking.
This meat would have been obtained in a variety of ways at this point in history, with one being the traditional aristocratic pursuit of falconry. Hunting with birds was still a part of Victorian society, and to find out more, Daniel spoke to one of our favourite Alnwick Castle performers, Raphael Historic Falconry.
Just as a note, this episode was recorded outside with our falconers, so you may hear some background noise and weather. You may also hear the occasional bird.
Please enjoy.
So we're very happy to be joined here on the Alnwick Castle podcast by some feathered friends, as well as two expert falconers, Emma and Mike from Raphael Historic Falconry. Hello.
Hello.
Well,
afternoon.
how are you both?
We're very well, tired after displaying all day.
Has it gone all right?
It has gone all right. Very windy, but the birds have been impeccable as always.
Well, thank you for inviting us into your muse. We're here to talk about, first of all, who you have with you today, because I can see, we can hear one.
You can hear, yeah.
So who's talking with us
So
right now?
the very vocal bird is a goshawk. That's Ella, our female goshawk, who is by far the most traditional species used in the art that we practice. In history, used to catch game for the larder. Brilliant at catching all sorts of feathered and furry things that are edible. And just a beast with wings.
And then just behind us...
Behind us we have a variety of birds on traditional screen perches, as they're called. So we've got a merlin, which was a lady's bird, a sporting bird in history. We have a peregrine, which of course is quite an infamous creature. We have an exotic in the form of an Arctic gerfalcon, who sat there quietly in his hood. A barn owl eating her dinner up in the far corner, and our eagle owl as well. And we've got a little kestrel in the corner, who's trying to be a wind hover, as they're designed to do in the breeze.
Yes, it is quite a windy day today, so that probably affects...
It does.
A falcon.
Yeah, it does. I mean, some birds need wind to fly, and it makes their flights better. Other birds, like owls, really don't need wind because they're designed to fly in stiller conditions. So we just have to pick and choose our birds and match them to the conditions through the day.
You come here to demonstrate falconry from all kinds of different time periods.
We do.
We see you a lot in the medieval and the Tudor periods.
Yep.
Yes, the late 15th century is sort of like our main period, I suppose we do. But we like to vary with other periods of history as well. Makes it interesting for us as well to tell different stories.
Yes, because this weekend when we're recording, it's the anniversary of VE Day. So we are seeing some World War II era falconry.
You're learning about the falcon that performed duty, intercepting enemy carrier pigeons during the war. Learning about cheeky little merlins that were trained by one particular chap on board of a ship in the Royal Navy, and he did that for morale as a mascot. Other birds, like the pigeons, of course, that were used to exchange messages and information with. So we like to try and tell the story, the wider story of all the different roles that birds performed during that period.
But you don't have trained pigeons.
Well,
as
we
part of
don't.
the show.
We have stunt pigeons, which are felt decoy pigeons. I'm not sure how having live pigeons in here would go down with the rest of the team.
But the reason we're talking today is a little bit further back in time than the Second World War, tying into the opening of our Great Kitchen at Alnwick Castle, is falconry in the Victorian period.
Yes.
So it wasn't something that stopped in the late 15th century. It carried on well into the 19th.
It did. It went up and down in popularity, mainly because of the introduction of the shotgun. So as soon as game shooting became accurate and popular, falconry took a nosedive, simply because guns were cheaper and easier to keep than, of course, live birds. But there was a revival that went through for the late 18th century onwards, and by the time we get to the 19th century, falconry is restored once again. It's now generally a fashionable gentleman's country pursuit. So you find it being practiced at some of our large country estates where they have the land and the prey and the time and the means to be able to practice it properly.
So it is for fashion that people are doing it. It's not. It's sort of a social thing for a Victorian gentleman.
It's no longer necessary as it was in the Tudor and the medieval periods, because we have guns to catch our game with now. Now it's a nod to tradition. It's been done for nostalgic reasons. It's an outdoor country pursuit, and as you say, it's a social activity, because you can, as a group, you can ride out on horseback. You can carry your hooded falcons with you. You can have a carriage following you with, picnic baskets and chairs. You can make a day of it. You can have ladies along watching and spectating, and just make it a fun day excursion.
Speaking as a Victorian gentleman, Mike, would you bring the ladies along to your?
Yeah, it was all part of the party, and especially going up onto the Scottish moor, the Sutherland Moor in particular, was where you would take your hunting parties. Now, we would take, in those days we didn't have 4x4s, so we were all out on ponies, and we had the cadger with the cage with all the falcons on. So it's still like the pomp and ceremony in the Victorian times, like there was in the Middle Ages, and we still used relatively same equipment, gloves, hoods, cages to carry the birds, little ponies to ride out onto the moors. So it wasn't just around the stately homes. It was quite a thing to say that you'd been up on the moor, or you'd been maybe away into parts of Asia hunting with your falcons. So there's more. It was more than just sort of carrying on the tradition. It was pushing the tradition forward.
So it went out of fashion, but it wasn't ever forgotten.
No, and there was a dedicated effort to make sure that it wasn't forgotten, because the last few remaining falconers realised that they had something special, and there were centuries and centuries of inherited skill and knowledge that will be lost if they didn't preserve it. So I think a lot of them understood the responsibility that they carried as well, which is nice.
But there were key differences. You were telling me last time we spoke about game laws coming in, which must have changed things a little bit. What were the game laws?
They did. So the 1831 game law was introduced, which suddenly meant that you could only hunt certain species of bird or animal in certain seasons, and that was by means of any device. So that included hawks and falcons, and it affected the trade in game as well. So it became a seasonal thing, whereas in further history, as long as you had the means and the inclination, you could hunt pretty much all year round. So now suddenly it was an autumn, winter, very, very early spring activity. Nothing happened through the summer months at all. And that's to do with preserving the game, because you don't want to be hunting them when they're breeding, and you don't want to be hunting the young, because that's, next season's stock. So I suppose in a way it was a form of very primitive conservation, although perhaps not. Not for the best of the interests. It was about preserving the best quarry on the best land for the people that owned it.
But also tied into the fact that the hawks and falcons themselves molt through the summertime, and to be flying your bird through the summertime hunting with it meant that you're trying to hunt through tall corn. You're trying to hunt through woodlands that are covered in green, so you can't see your bird as well, and the bird couldn't see to dive into cover quite because you've got undergrowth. So it was pretty much became seasonal also, because the birds don't completely molt out until about the end of August, starting in May. So from May through to the end of August, you wouldn't touch your bird. You just put it in an aviary, chuck lots of food at it, and let nature take its course. And pick your bird up at the end of August into September, and then hunt it through the hunting seasons. So it pretty much lined up with everything else that was going on.
The equipment you mentioned hadn't really changed all that much. The tradition hadn't changed massively, but had the types of birds used changed, or were they the same kinds of birds that you might have seen 300-400 years previously?
Yeah, I think the only real changes is that we could obviously, as we were venturing out amongst places like Asia and the Middle East and up into Russia and places, that we were finding more and more birds that maybe we hadn't come across that we were trying in falconry. So, readable supply of the lugger falcon, which is very similar to the little lanner we have here today, the saker falcon, and some of these exotics like the sooty falcon and other things. That falconers were great throughout most periods of history if they came across a different bird of prey, trying it, seeing what it's like. seeing how much of a hunter it was or how much of a scavenger it was, whether it could be utilised for hawking or falconry, and all these things were great through the Victorian times, because we were discovering all these different things, going down into South America and finding the ornate hawk eagle, which is an amazingly beautiful bird of prey. I'd love to have one. I always have done.
I have to say, though, they pretty much stuck with what they knew, because we're lucky in Britain to have some of the best species for falconry anyway. We've got the merlin, the peregrine, the goshawk, the sparrowhawk. There's nothing really globally that beats those anyway. So we're very privileged anyway.
So you've been out, you've taken the birds for a flight, they've caught something. What are they catching, and are you then using that in the kitchens of your castle or your stately home? Is that going into what you might be eating, or is it purely for the sport of being out and about?
Well, in all honesty, it depends on what you catch. So some of your catches will go into the hawk's larder. So it might not be good enough for human consumption, but that's great food for your birds.
Squirrel, weasel, stoat, those sort of things.
And then the better quality game, different species of duck, partridge, coot maybe, obviously rabbit and hare, they'll go into the human larder. So you might cut off certain parts of the animal, like the head, which was traditionally given to the hawk. But then, the breast meat, the good quality meat, that will go in the human larder. So in a way, you and your hawk could be almost self-sufficient on your catches. And the great benefit of eating something your hawk has caught, compared to the traditional 19th century way of shooting things, is you don't have to remove the lead pellets from it before you consume it. Because many a chap broke a tooth at the dining table eating game that had not been plucked and gone over properly.
Well, we're lucky at Alnwick Castle because we had a game larder, but before the game got to that point, there was a plucking room. Yes. Especially probably for that purpose.
Yes, absolutely, yes. Removing all of the nasties and making them kitchen clean, yep.
Were there still falconers, or was this becoming more of the role of a gamekeeper?
Well, there were two types of falconer in the 19th century. You had your professional falconer, so that was your working man, like a gamekeeper, and he would have served the gentleman falconer, who of course was the noble, the titled person. He did all of the stuff in public, but behind the scenes it was the professional falconer that did most of the hard work. And we know from really detailed accounts in the 19th century that most Victorian professional falconers were actually previously gamekeepers. So they would get sent along to the old hawking club, which existed at the time, and they would be trained in the falconry way. And then they were suddenly much more skilled and much more useful as well.
You were just part of the household, really.
Yeah. Well, a big household like Alnwick, as I've mentioned, next to the great kitchen we have our larder rooms. The game larder is the furthest away from the main kitchen and is the one that we maybe know the least about, because there's very little that's survived of its original fittings.
Yeah.
But what would a traditional Victorian game larder look like? What's going to happen once the birds have caught it and it's going in? Is it ready to be cooked once it's in the larder?
No, I mean, it all depends who the owner of the castle was like at the time. Some gentlemen like their game maybe just hung for a couple of days, but some actually liked it till it almost turned blue. Possibly why the game larder was so far away, because the smell would have been horrendous. There'd been lots of blood about, lots of feathers about, but waiting for the meat to turn blue was quite something. I mean, it's obviously I've never tried it, but obviously it would have been a very rich taste, an acquired taste. But as I say, it all depends how you wanted it served to you.
We think here, and this is one of the big questions that we have about opening our kitchens, we think there was probably a secondary game larder outside where all of that...
The mucky stuff was done first. Yeah.
And then once that had been done, it comes through a basement into the plucking room.
Yeah.
Then it's ready. Then we think it goes in the game larder, so it's ready just to get into the kitchen from there.
Well, I imagine outside the gutting was done, so all of the nasties were cleared away. And then you're just left with a carcass that just needs plucking, and then just making neat and tidy, ready for the spit.
The important thing is the hanging. The hanging of game, whatever it is, whether it's duck, partridge, pheasant, the hanging of game was the most important. You could spoil it if it rotted, obviously, but how close you could get it to that point before you ate it, I hope I'm not making your people feel ill, but as close as you could get it to that would be the best served game. So your kitchen staff really needed to be that skilled in the timing of it.
We're pretty sure that here the staff did have that skill, because it seems like this was an estate that needed its own separate game larder.
Yeah.
Smaller country houses might have combined them, but the kitchens here were designed with that as one of the purposes. So it must have been a big thing, whether with birds or with shooting in this part of the country,
absolutely.
as well as Scotland.
I mean, this estate has several gamekeepers' cottages on it. We know that there were kennels for hounds and all sorts, so it was probably quite a big occupation, harvesting game. In whatever fashion they did it, there was no doubt a constant supply of game constantly coming in.
All part of life on a 19th century estate, to have your birds, to have your hawking as an opportunity. Yeah,
living off the land, enjoying the sport of doing it, but then also the rewards of the catches at the end of it.
You'd have walked into your game larder, had a sniff and said, yeah, that's right. That's ready.
I might not, but...
I'm a vegetarian, I can't possibly comment.
Yes. Was poaching a common issue?
Well, it was.
Yeah,
it was, because the introduction of the game laws, of course, made it more difficult for the common man to take previously what they'd been able to harvest from the wild. Land was becoming more and more privatised, fences and, barriers were going up, and it was difficult for your average working man to just go out and get a rabbit now. We know that poachers went to great lengths, obviously doing it in a clandestine fashion, sometimes going out in the dark. Some poachers were known to take their wives with them because they wore those big crinoline skirts and they could hide things under their skirts if they came across anybody. So where there was a will, there was certainly a way. But the game laws certainly increased poverty for a lot of rural people, unfortunately,
We've talked about it as a functional thing, going into the larders, but was there, in a sporting sense, was that just estate to estate, or would you travel around with your birds in the same way that people might have done to show their status in an earlier era, or would people come to you?
Well, it was not so much done for other people to see anymore. It was about your own private enjoyment, and gentlemen falconers were quite private and preserving of their art. But this art has always been mobile by nature, so moving around was never a difficult thing. It's just that as part of the British Empire, we were now moving our birds around over greater distances. So gentlemen in the winter, and we had some of the coldest winters in the late 19th century on record, they found it very difficult to find enough days to have sport in this country. So they would often pack up their houses and go over to North Africa, go over to India, rent a hunting lodge, hire some camels or some horses, employ some local falconers, get them to trap some birds out there and actually practice falconry in a desert environment. And it taught them new skills, it exposed them to new bits of equipment that we weren't using over here, and just expanded their horizons a lot further.
I think that's also an important part of it, because today we're so used to being able to just go out and get our birds and buy them from a breeder. But in those days, you wouldn't have gone over there with your birds. You would have gone over there, trapped your birds up, trained them, got them ready to go, which would take, several weeks. So it would all be part and parcel of it. Mm-hmm. So, you wouldn't have gone out there and then day one gone hunting. You'd have gone out there, find out where the nest sites were, gone and trapped the birds. So you'd gone out there a particular time of year as well. Mm-hmm. So it would all have been set up to do that. I think the trouble is with us today is it's so easy for us to just go out and buy a bird because there's a market for it. But in those days, everything was wild taken. There was no captive breeding.
But a bit like game shooting, if you were a member of the old hawking club and all of the gentlemen were titled privileged people, I mean, there were colonels and dukes and princes and all sorts of people, they would move their falcon hunts from their different estates. So a different member of the club might invite the other club members over to their estate this particular week, or come hawking over here. And then that invite would get extended to other estates and other members of the club. And so you could just, move around the country by going to every member and having a spot of sport on their patch.
It's quite a good example of the way that Victorian high society worked, with these imperial links and the modernising of the country estates and the the private members clubs. It's all part of that same world, isn't
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, they go hand in hand, really. And they were very reluctant to let outsiders in. I mean, there's a whole discussion about them opening up a public falconry exhibition in the late 19th century at Alexandra Palace. And gosh, the objections they had to it were so strong because they didn't want to invite the common man into their very privileged world. They didn't even particularly want women to come out on their hunts because they said that women brought a coffee housing atmosphere, too much chat, not enough focus on the sport. So they were quite old-fashioned and quite particular about it. But I think a few members realised that they had to move with the times because if they kept it private, it was probably going to die.
And keeping the tradition alive seems to have worked because
We're here. Yeah.
We know that in the 19th century we did have a tower at the castle called the Falconer's Tower, completely unconnected to the Game Larder, unconnected to the kitchens. By 1884, it did have a hydroelectric generator connected to it from the river. So chances are very few birds actually in the castle by the 19th century, unfortunately.
Yeah, I mean, it would be lovely to know, wouldn't it, why it adopted that name. All we can think of is if we go way, way back into the Middle Ages, it was sometimes traditional to free loft your bird in a tower. You used it as a glorified aviary. And that would have been at a time, of course, when the castle was not as busy and as populated as it was in later times. So maybe they used it as a glorified loft or as a glorified aviary for a period of years. And then they found a better way of doing it, or they found a better use for the tower itself. But it's a mystery that persists, isn't it?
It does, yeah. We haven't quite got completely to the bottom of it yet. But since the last time you were here, we've opened up a whole new room connected in some way with the Game Larder, with the kitchens.
Yeah.
So it's really nice to have you here in your Victorian guise, in your 20th century guise, when that larder was going to have been in use. Have you got any other favourite stories about the Victorian period of falconry you'd like to share with people?
Well, one of my favourite stories involves the Queen.
Victoria herself.
Generally, in falconry history, falconry has remained popular because it's always had royal support. Queen Victoria was one of the first monarchs who had no interest in falconry whatsoever. Who can blame her? But there is a lovely story that dates from an exhibition that was being held at the Crystal Palace. And Her Majesty was being given a private viewing a few days before it opened to the public. And as she was being taken around the exhibits, fruits, flowers, exotic things from different parts of her empire at the time, she noticed that there were bird droppings on some of the leaves and the petals, and she was not in the slightest impressed by this. So she called over her best friend and her advisor, who was the Duke of Wellington, and she asked for his advice. And he was a very learned, very worldly chap. And he apparently rubbed his chin and he said 2 words, "Sparrowhawk, ma'am." So he obviously had a knowledge of falconry, a little bit. He had a knowledge of the predator-prey relationship. And we can only assume that a gentleman called a sparvitter, so someone who specialised in hunting with a sparrowhawk, was probably sent for and hopefully eradicated those birds. If that is true, then it means that Her Majesty was the first person to enrol birds in the service of pest control, which is an industry in its own right today.
Yeah.
Who knew that she might have been the first to start that trend?
I saw that very thing happen in a market in San Francisco on holiday last year. I met a bird who was having a great time making sure that all pests were clear of that market building.
Perfect. Well, there you go.
Yeah.
Queen Vicky started it all.
Well, there we go. That seems like a lovely note to end on, with a tribute to Queen Victoria in the age of Victorian falconry. So thank you, Emma, thank you, Mike, and thank you to our goshawk guest, special guest star.
Yeah, who's quieting down at last.
Yes, thank you very much.
Now we get one final word out of her. Nice to talk to you.
Thank you.
You can see Raphael Historic Falconry's fantastic birds of prey demonstrations from a range of historical periods throughout the summer here at Alnwick Castle. They'll be with us in July and August. For full details, please check our website out.
This is also not the first time they've appeared on the Alnwick Castle podcast. Head into our archive and go all the way back to episode 4 to hear Emma's introduction to falconry throughout the ages.
If you enjoyed this episode, please let us know by giving us a rating or review on your podcast platform, or by sharing and recommending us to your friends.
We'll be back next month with another new podcast, but until then, I've been Daniel.
And I've been Deborah.
Thank you very much for listening, and goodbye.
Goodbye.